So, excuse me, a quick throwback to Marketing 101. When we are looking at ourselves in the candidate process, you need to look at yourself as if you are marketing a product. And so if you, the candidate, are the product, you need to think about some core things. You need to think about product attributes. What are the things that you have to offer? If we were thinking about a consumer product, let's think about something, as simple as, a dishwasher, which is actually probably a pretty complex thing. If you are choosing a dishwasher, which can be quite an investment in something, because of course the employer is investing in you as an employee, there are a myriad of different things that they're going to consider when choosing which dishwasher, because there's quite a few available in the market. Similarly, there are quite a few available candidates. And so what attributes do you have that you can offer to the employer that will set you apart from others? Okay, so part of it is just knowing yourself. Do a little bit of introspection, be really honest about what you can and cannot offer, work with someone else, work with a tool that may be an assessment tool or something like that to help you really know what are your attributes as an employee. Connected to that is the product differentiation. If again, the candidates are the products, how do you differentiate yourself from the myriad of other candidates who are also either applying for the job or even are part of the passive candidate pool who, exist just in resume banks and things like that. Okay, so how do you differentiate yourself? How do you show that you have something that someone else doesn't? You really have to stand out in that way. And be careful, because you can also stand out in a negative way that would make a, hiring manager or a recruiter, not interested in you. And then the second principle is the consumer. In the candidate process, the consumer is the employer. But within even the employer title, there's actually two persons that are teamed, if you will, for the employer to do the selection process. Typically, the first is HR, recruiter, talent management, talent acquisition, whatever that company calls it. Generically, we'll call it the recruiter. That person's role is typically to do a little bit of pre-screening, maybe feels like gatekeeping, and we'll get to that in a second. But that person's role is really to look for minimum qualifications, to go out and actively find candidates, but also to only put a slate of qualified candidates in front of the hiring managers and the other interviewers. But then ultimately, if you get that interview, the selection process then typically is on the shoulders of the hiring manager and or the interviewing group, whoever that might be. So really, again, there's two members of that employer process that selects whether or not you move forward in the process. First is HR or recruiter, and second, and ultimately, is typically the hiring manager. So keeping this in mind will help you use some of your business acumen to think about yourself as a product, and how do you, again, know the attributes of that product yourself? How do you differentiate from all the other products on the market, the other candidates? And then ultimately, what is the consumer looking for? What does the consumer need? What do they care about? What are their priorities? And ultimately, how do you meet those and match those? Okay. Some of the things that you need to think about when you are thinking about your job path and your career path are, what are the things that really drive you? What I advise students to do is to think about their passion areas. The passion areas are really going to help inform them what industries they want to get into. Now, you might be really interested in medicine, but you're not cut out to be a doctor. Well, there are 1,000 different jobs that have everything to do with medicine and have nothing to do with being a practicing physician. Similarly, my childhood dream was to be an astronaut. I was really, really, really invested in being an astronaut. Well, between my terrible eyesight and my terrible math skills, there was no way I was going to be an astronaut. However, I was able to, keep my passion area forefront of where I wanted to work, and I ended up working for Lockheed Martin. But again, my skill set was not as an astronaut. My skill set was in human resources, and so that is what I ended up doing for Lockheed Martin, was doing human resources. So again, I advise students to think about their talent areas. What are they good at? What skills come naturally to them? What do people come to them for, in terms of knowledge or abilities? And to use that to focus in on what your discipline will be. If your passion informs what your industry is going to be. What are you really into? Whether that's sports or cooking or fashion or animals or space or fill in the blank. The talent area, what are you good at, will help to inform you what should your discipline be? What should your job be? Okay, what can you do and perform on a daily basis that maybe, hopefully, is somehow connected to your passion area in terms of industry? Now, could I have done human resources for the auto industry or the food industry or real estate or anything like that? Sure, I could have, but I probably wouldn't have been as happy or as fulfilled or have had a long-term, career in those areas because it didn't, really feed my passion areas. I was extremely fortunate that I was able to parlay, my human resources education into, a company and an industry that I was, really genuinely invested in. But that brings us to the third part of the triad, which is lifestyle. Okay? There are many industries that have a certain kind of lifestyle that they promote. Now, of course, COVID has changed a lot of things, but not everything. And so you have to think about what kind of lifestyle you want to pursue. Is there a geographic element to your lifestyle? Like if you ride horses, you're probably not going to want to live in the city. Or if you are a crazy surfer, you're probably not going to want to live in Montana. There are things you want to think about. And the reason you want to think about this is for sustainability. You can probably do anything for a short amount of time, whether that's a few months, a few years, a decade, but ultimately it's going to eat away at you if you cannot leave the life that you want to lead, whatever that might be. And so definitely consider your lifestyle and your geographic choices, your hobbies, your proximity to people you want to be near or not near, all of those things that allow you to live the life you want to live. It's the people who ignore this portion of job searching that I think are not happy in their jobs, even though it may be lucrative, even though the job may be rewarding. They don't have a life outside of work. And I don't think that's sustainable. And I don't wish that for anybody. What I would love to see is for people to be able to figure out what their dream job would be by considering all three of these things. Their passion, again, can help you figure out what your industry is going to be. Your talent helps you figure out what your discipline area is going to be, your daily job. And then your lifestyle kind of undergirds everything with what life do I want? Do I want a 9-to-5? Do I want, something that has peaks and valleys like accounting where it has like really busy times and kind of a lull time? What is it that you want your life to look like? And, figuring out where those three things converge will help you home in on what job will make you the happiest in the longest term. Now, I don't think there's a single job that is your dream job, to exclude all others. I actually think that, within this Venn diagram, there's quite a lot of jobs within the central part of that Venn diagram that will make you very happy. And you could move around within that central part of that Venn diagram to, different industries, different types of roles, as your lifestyle changes, as you go from, a young, college graduate professional with no dependents, no mortgage, things like that, and can move around and live in a, anywhere you want to live. And then later on in your career, you might have a mortgage, you might have, other kinds of commitments, you might have children and you care about what school district you're in, those kinds of things. As those things change over time, and they should change over time as your life changes and as you grow and mature, your priorities will change. And that is natural, that is normal, there's nothing wrong with that. But it may actually change the course of your career path. And again, that is normal, that is natural, that is okay. Definitely, take the moment to step back and figure out what your priorities are at this point in your life. Because again, as your life changes, your priorities will change, and therefore your job might change. Okay. All right. Let's talk about recruiters. I mentioned before that, a recruiter is one of the two people of the employers that are going to have a role in selecting whether or not you go forward in the selection process. Some people consider HR a giant black hole. And whenever I hear that, I always ask, so tell me what you sent to HR. And invariably I get, they sent a resume, or they sent 1,000 resumes, or they sent, blast emails of resumes. And then I ask them, how many of those resumes were customized to the job? Invariably, the answer is always no. Invariably, they wrote one resume and they blasted that resume to every single recruiter that they could find. And I think that that is an enormous waste of your time and the recruiter's time. And the reason is that there is no possible way that you wrote a generic resume that answers all of the things I asked for in my job description. There's just no way. And that's why I never got back to you. And that's why you think that I'm a black hole, because I didn't respond to you because you sent me garbage. If you would have taken the time to take your resume and customize it and actually answer the questions and requests that I have in my job description, then I would have jumped. I would have jumped at a candidate that did that. Okay. HR is not your enemy. HR is a partner in the job search process. But you have to understand that recruiters get measured by what we lovingly refer to as butts and chairs. If I've got a vacancy, I'm getting dinked on that every single week. Okay, I get measured by vacancies. So why would I work against you? Why would I not give you a job that you're qualified for? And the answer is, you sent me documentation, your resume, that does not in any way show that you're qualified for the job. So let that sink in. If you showed me that you were qualified for the job, I would jump at you as a candidate and get you an interview right away. Okay. So if you're not having a lot of success sending out your resume, you've really got to rethink what you're sending out. You give us what we ask for and we'll give, well, I can't say we'll give you a job. We'll give you an interview at the very minimum, because the interview is also another portion. So you've got to look at job descriptions very, very critically and analytically and customize your cover letter and your resume to that job description. If you do that, a recruiter will respond in kind and go, yes, that's what I want. Or, hey, I've got other candidates who are more qualified, which certainly could be the case. But they will not be a black hole because you will have shown that you are in some way a strong candidate. Recruiters hate generic blast resumes. It is incredibly obvious, incredibly obvious. Remember, we read resumes for a living, hundreds and hundreds of resumes a day, thousands of resumes a year, tens of thousands of resumes over the course of your career. It is incredibly easy to spot a very generic resume, and it will not go very far. It will not go very far. Okay, so you're wasting your time and my time with generic resumes. Okay, so let's talk about the non-generic resumes. How do you actually get my attention with a resume? Okay, there are two general types of resumes, or two types of resumes, the general resume and the response resume. The general resume is exactly that. It's generic, it's general, it's generic. It's the kind of resume you probably will walk into a career fair with, or you just have in your back pocket in case you run into somebody or somebody wants a resume like right now. But if you are applying for a specific job, that means you've read a job description. If you have a job description, you should be writing a response resume. Let me say that one more time because that's really important. If you have a specific job description that you are applying for, then you should be writing a response resume. Okay, that is exactly what it sounds like, response resume. It is in response to the requests that the recruiter has put on paper. They are looking for these minimum qualifications, this education, this experience, these certifications, blah, 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 blah. You should be writing your resume in direct response to all of the things that that recruiter has asked for. Through your company research, through your industry research, you should be, thinking about what are the things that are important to this company, to this industry, to this role. Maybe this is a role that requires a lot of certifications, and you've got up-to-date certifications. Make sure that's on there, even if they haven't asked for it. Those kinds of things. So in a response resume, read the description very, very closely, the job description, and customize your resume directly to it. A key word that I ask all of my students when I'm looking at their resume is, why is this line relevant? How is this space, this bullet item, relevant to the job description? And it's not relevant to them. It's not what you care about as a candidate. It's relative to me, the recruiter, and I've told you on paper exactly what I care about. So you've got to be able to respond and show me what you have that answers what I've requested. Okay. And again, make sure that it is laser focused on the job posting. Don't make stuff up. Don't exaggerate. Don't fabricate. Don't embellish. Be truthful, but focus or phrase everything very, very focused on what the job description asked for. You are welcome to omit the stuff that it doesn't ask for. Okay. Now, the thing you also have to think about is it matters what the recruiter wants to see, not what you want to show off. Again, I work with undergraduates. They're, typically freshmen or juniors, or, for the two kinds of sections that I cover. And for the freshmen especially, their resumes are pretty thin because they just haven't had a lot of experience in the internship or job market quite yet. And they'll have a lot of volunteerism or a lot of extracurriculars, which can be very relevant. I'm not saying they're not, but they will tend to highlight the things that they're most proud of, that they got an award for, or they have, talked the most about, or that they are, that they worked really hard for and, get a lot of kudos for. Not necessarily relevant to the job. Now it might be, but more often than not, it's not. So for example, if you, a candidate went overseas and did some sort of, Engineers Without Borders thing where they, built clean water for a, very needy village somewhere, that's amazing. That's wonderful. That's fantastic. But I'm not sure what it has to do with this finance job. Now, if they were the treasurer of that organization and it was an overseas trip and it had a lot of financial moving parts, yeah, tell me about it. But that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the actual engineering or the actual, water well digging and things like that. Now, if you were applying for USAID, which does those kinds of programs, or Doctors Without Borders, or a program that does that kind of engineering, yes, that would be relevant. But if you're applying to, a small accounting firm in Rockville that, just does mostly, small businesses, I don't really know where that's relevant. Okay. And that probably means that there are other things on your resume that you could highlight instead that would be much more relevant to the recruiter reading that resume. So again, it may be kind of painful, but you need to not necessarily put things that you're proud of. Instead, put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter and give the recruiter what they're asking for. You can certainly use that, trip for, building that well overseas in your interview process, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But on the resume, just give me what I've asked for in the job description, or you probably will never make it to the interview stage. And again, as a response resume, that means it is customized for every single job description that you're submitting, every single one. Even if the job is with a company that's in the same industry, covers some of the same place, some of the same space within that industry, I bet you the job descriptions are different. So again, the resume should be written to the specific job description, not just that industry or not just that company even. All right, so let's talk about experience. Again, working with undergraduates, a lot of them say, well, I don't have any experience. And I always tell them, I'm not sure that's true, because experience is not just what jobs you've held. Experience are the things that you've learned that didn't necessarily have a job title, didn't necessarily get paid, didn't necessarily, be associated with any particular, employer. They can come from volunteer. They can come from, other kinds of clubs and organizations that you might have been in, sports organizations, specific schoolwork, or, major projects or programs that you've worked on, in your previous schoolwork. For most of the people on this call who are all alums, think about the kinds of special projects you've been on in your workplace. Think about some of the volunteerism you might have done. Think about PTA or the Lions Club, or the pickleball team you might be on. Is there something that you've done on one of those organizations that you can point to for leadership, for communication, for organization, for being adaptable and agile? Even religious organizations that you might be a part of, or political organizations that you might be a part of. Skills can be extracted from those experiences and still used as examples of your knowledge without necessarily going into the religious or political or other areas that are a little bit more private and you may not want to discuss, and that probably shouldn't be brought up in the workplace anyway. But you can still talk about the skills that you performed and therefore know how to do, especially again if they're relevant to the job description. Okay. Again, a lot of times I'm coaching recent high school grads, college freshmen, and we have to look at all of their background and try to attract every little bit that we can. Okay. Again, experience and transferable skills are not the same thing. Transferable skills can be gained in a wide variety of environments, and experience is typically very specific to the situation. Very specific to the situation. So for example, if I worked at McDonald's and I can flip burgers, I can probably go to Wendy's and flip burgers because the experience of flipping burgers is transferable, but it's also very specific to the situation. Okay, the scenario of McDonald's and the scenario of Wendy's are probably pretty similar, although they probably want to argue that it's not. But if I worked at McDonald's and I was in charge of ordering the materials, the supplies, the food, the paper products, the cleaning materials, the uniform parts, the advertisements, all those things, then essentially what I was doing was supply chain management. I was managing all the things that we need to run our operation. I was looking forward on schedules. I was making sure, oh, summer's coming. I need to order more ice cream, material. Oh, this new burger that's really known for being really juicy and messy is coming. I need to order more napkins. All of those kinds of things are all the kinds of things you do in supply chain management. Therefore, I don't have to only look at a very identical situation for McDonald's, like Wendy's. I can now expand what I'm looking at and say, what other companies, what other industries use supply chain management? Because I literally have supply chain management experience at McDonald's. But guess what? McDonald's is $1 billion business. Maybe my franchise location is $1 million business, multi-million-dollar business. That supply chain management is a transferable skill. It is not dependent upon the situation, unlike the flipping burgers, which is. As a transferable skill, I could take that to Northrop Grumman and say, hey, I've got supply chain management skills. Let me show you. Okay, so recognize that experience is very situational. And transferable skills are not situational. You own that knowledge now, and you can put it, to work at another situation entirely. So distinguish between the two in your own mind when you're thinking about your product attributes, your own attributes, and help the interviewer or recruiter see that you have these things, especially if you're trying to break into a new industry. That is very important because it is hard sometimes to get attention when you don't appear to have a lot of experience in that industry. But if you've got a lot of transferable skills, then it is a much easier argument to make. Okay. This is a real life example from one of my students. He worked for a tent company and he had some really great experience, but he could not figure out how to put it into a resume that anybody would pay attention to that didn't work in the tent industry. Okay. So he had what he thought were specific experiences in tents, and he did not want to work in the tent industry going forward. So he and I worked very closely on reframing his tent experience and removing all the references to the tent industry. These are these big tents that you get for like weddings and giant barbecues and things like that. These are not little pop-up tents. Okay. So if you look in the blue box, this is what we devised to, again, extract out the industry-specific terms and terminology and just talk about what was the experience, what were the transferable skills and the knowledge that he now possessed that he could bring to another employer. Now, this isn't everything that was on his resume, of course. This was a very specific experience that he had that he was proud of, where he was able to reduce the cleaning time that it took for the tents to put them back into stock and inventory and then make them available again to the next renter. And he was very, very proud of this. But he wanted, again, other industries who were not tents to be able to see it and value it. So we took out all of the references to tents and we just kept in the generic, in a good way, terminology that somebody else could read this and go, oh, I could see that, being valuable in my workplace. Okay. All right. Let's talk about cover letters. There are a couple of major types of correspondence in the job search process, and the cover letter is the first one that you're going to encounter. The purpose of a cover letter is to really introduce yourself briefly and to tell us why you would be a great fit. Okay. Again, just like your resume, it needs to be tailored. It needs to be tailored to the job that you're applying for, the company you're applying for, and it needs to tell me something that's not in the resume. I can read your resume. I'm going to read your resume. Do not reiterate or regurgitate your resume. That is an enormous waste of your time and of my time. And it will not put me in a great frame of mind reading your documents, because I'm going to look at this and go, this person has no clue what a cover letter is. They just wasted my time. And I'm not going to be super psyched to read your resume, because I'm going to be like, this person doesn't know what they're doing. So again, a cover letter is a narrative format of introducing yourself. It is an opportunity to give me context and an opportunity to tell me something that is not in your resume. One of the biggest challenges with your resume is that it is past tense. I hope you guys already knew that. Resumes are past tense, meaning they've already happened. Okay, so they are just the facts. They are factual. You don't say things in the resume that have not yet happened. You can, however, say those things in a cover letter. If you're planning to go get your MBA tomorrow, you're going to start classes tomorrow, that doesn't go in your resume because it hasn't happened yet, but it can absolutely go in your cover letter. If you've not yet sat for your CPA exam, but it's scheduled for, February 5th, that goes in your cover letter, not in your resume because it hasn't happened yet. Those kinds of things. Okay. So again, the cover letter is great for narrative context. Why would you be a great candidate for this job? Resumes are just facts. They are just facts. Okay. One of the other examples that I use in my class where a cover letter was incredibly effective was a student who was interested in working for, I think it was for L'Oreal, but she didn't want to work in the cosmetic side. She wanted to work in the research side and in the skincare side. And in her cover letter, she talked about the fact that her grandmother, who was from, a different generation, before they knew that much about skincare and melanoma and the sun, essentially, and its effect on skin cancer, didn't have any protections on her skin as a young person sitting out in the sun, 10 hours a day in the summer. Well, her grandmother died of melanoma. And I don't know if you know, but melanoma is a really, really hard cancer to treat. And it is a very painful cancer to die from, because your skin is your largest organ on your body. Well, her cover letter was very affecting because it wasn't a sob story, but it was very affecting, saying that she had a personal connection to skincare and skin health, and that she really admired L'Oreal's skincare line that had all kinds of SPF in it and sought to educate people about how to protect themselves long-term, and blah, 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 blah. And it was a really affecting cover letter because she had a very personal connection to this. Now, I'm not saying you have to have a story about your grandmother, but if you have some sort of narrative story about why you are super passionate about this area, or what makes you a great fit for the job or the industry or whatever, to the point that you are comfortable with it, use it. She was comfortable telling the story. And let me tell you, as a recruiter, I absolutely would have remembered that, because that's the kind of passion that I cannot teach. I can't teach someone to be super invested in skincare and SPF, but she's going to walk in the front door already knowing this and already, really believing in it. And so that was a very, very effective cover letter. So think about things like that. Okay, the mechanics of a cover letter are, again, the introduction, the main points, very succinct main points about what it is you want me as a recruiter to think about. And then a closing, how do I get in contact with you? I can't tell you how many resumes and cover letters I've read that have no contact information. It's astonishing how much, how often that happens. And could I, go and Google you or find you on a database or whatever? Yeah, I could. I'm not gonna, because I have a stack of 500 other resumes without those errors, you know, again, don't shoot yourself in the foot that way. Make sure that you've got contact information. Okay. And then finally, let's say that your resume was great. Let's say that your cover letter was awesome. Let's say that you are a shoo-in for an interview slot. Okay. How do you ace that interview when you don't know what kinds of questions they're going to ask you? And this is how. There are 5 core competencies that interviewers are looking for. This is not industry specific. This is not even discipline specific. I would say that these would apply to an engineer just as much as an accounting professional, just as much as a marketing professional. Okay, these 5 core competencies can really apply to every industry. So if you get ready with examples that are categorized in these 5 core competency areas, when I ask you a question, you're probably going to be able to, and I say probably because I can't anticipate every single question, you're probably going to be able to figure out which of these 5 core competency areas my question falls in. And then if you've prepared examples, and I'm going to get to this in just a second, if you've prepared examples for each of these 5 core competency areas, then you'll be able to bring that back up into your, memory and tell me the example that illustrates how you demonstrate one of these competencies. Okay. All right, so let me show you the tool, and I am going to share these slides with the meeting organizers after this event so that they can forward it to the attendees on this call. Okay, so again, 5 core competencies that apply to any industry. Okay, whoops, let me move forward. Okay, so 5 big examples is what I call this. 5 big examples. The reason is because you need more than one, and you want them to be big examples. You want them to be really major projects you've worked on, major deliverables, major programs, big examples, complex, long-term, in-depth, whatever those might be. In some industries, maybe long-term is like 6 months. Maybe in some industries, long-term is like 6 years. So it depends on which industry you're talking about. You're going to write down all you can from these examples from multiple perspectives, meaning multiple competencies. So let's say you had let's say you're an architect and you have had a really big building project. You could break down pieces out of that big major example, this big building example, and break down examples of agility, where you've had to demonstrate agility in, changing schedules or changing suppliers or changing budgets and those things. Communication, communicating up with the clients, communicating horizontally with your peers, communicating down with vendors. And I don't mean down, I just mean, in the hierarchy of things. All those kinds of communication skills and styles, you probably have lots of examples of that. Leadership, communication, initiative, teamwork, all those things can be extracted from that, building example. And then you can bring specific examples into the document I'm going to show you in just a second. And then when I ask you, tell me about a time and how, tell me about how you operate as a team member, you can pull out the team example and go, let me give you an example. So tell me what you're like as a leader. What's your, leadership style? Let me give you an example. Those kinds of things. Okay. So this is my 5 big examples tool. It's just a simple chart. So the idea here is that the 5 big examples are across the top. So the first one might be your first major job. Number 2 might be your second big job, or maybe another big project. Then maybe there was a class project and maybe a club or a volunteer situation. Under initiative and leadership, you're going to want to come up with at least 2 to 3 examples across those 5 situations. And I have just some dummy text in here to show you. You don't need one in every single one. You need maybe 2, maybe 3. You're looking every vertical column. You want to have more than one example. So for example, right now under example 4, there's 2 examples. I've got initiative and leadership, and I've got communication. Great. In that club situation, I can show you or talk to you about situations where I've demonstrated initiative and leadership, and I can show you examples of demonstrating communication skills amongst my club members. Under teamwork, horizontally, I have examples from my first job, and I have examples from my volunteer situation. And those are going to be things that I can give you different environments from, because if they say, tell me about what you're like as a team member, I can give the job one. And then if they go, oh, well, can you give me a different example of when you're not a leader, but you're actually like low man on the totem pole kind of thing? And maybe my volunteer situation, which I just joined, would be something like that. So the idea here is that you want multiple examples in multiple competencies, so that by the time you walk in for that interview, you've got all these examples fresh in your mind, and you are able to present them very quickly verbally in the interview process. Now look over here on the right-hand side, you'll see example number 6. There's no limit to how many examples you can have. I just call them 5 because I suggest that you have a minimum of 5. But under adaptability and flexibility, I didn't have any examples for job 1, job 2, my class project, my club situation, or my volunteer situation. I didn't have any examples of adaptability and flexibility. So I had to think, well, where did I show that skill? And the answer was number 6. Maybe that's a family situation. And, I'm happy to talk about it. And maybe that was an adaptability, flexibility kind of situation. And then that's my example for that. Okay. Again, think about the things outside of work that you have, demonstrated some of these skills, and don't limit yourself just to traditional work. Again, look at sports clubs, look at, hobby clubs, look at volunteer situations, look at your home life. Again, and a good example of the home life example was, I had a student who was the oldest of a family of, multiple siblings, and his youngest sibling had a very profound health challenge where that sibling could never be left alone. Lived at home, had caregivers throughout the day, people were coming in and out, but his role was he had certain hours during the week where he was on point to be the caregiver for his sibling. And this person, the sibling, literally depended upon whoever was with them to make sure that their equipment was working, that they could breathe properly, that they were being stimulated properly, engaged with, those kinds of things. And this, 18-year-old college freshman told me that this was really a big deal, for that person's, adaptability and flexibility, because they had to move a lot of things around to make sure they were always able and available to care for this, family member. Again, think about things outside of traditional work where you may have gained skills or experience that could demonstrate what you would be like in the workplace in terms of these 5 core competencies. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I guess we're going to open it up for questions now. Is that right, Logan?
Yes, it is. So I have a couple questions from the chat already.
Okay, great.
One right off the bat was, how do you determine what your passions and talents are?
Oh, wow. That's a very,
Yes, good one to start.
that's a very personal journey, I guess.
Right.
My suggestion would be that there are quite a lot of assessment tools out there. You can go old school like the Myers-Briggs. You can go, some of the more newer ones like Clifton Strengths. There are quite a few personal assessment tools out there. In fact, if you Google personal assessment tool, a lot of them are probably free. They might have ads or something, and some of them are not free. And, they're going to vary based on whether they're more career oriented or more just like personality oriented. But a lot of those assessment tools are really well done, but do more than one, because again, they're each going to have their own limitations. I found a lot of good value to those and some surprises that, I look at it the first time I get my assessment, I'm like, that's not true. Then you live with it for a little while and you go, oh, wow, that is really true. So I think some of the assessment tools could be really valuable in that way. In terms of talent, I would say that very often those are the things that, you always joke about, oh, she or he can do that in their sleep. They're just really good at whatever it is. Either they're just naturally good at it, or they took to the training really well, or they have a natural interest in it, so they keep up with it. Those kinds of things, those kinds of talent area skill sets, kind of that aptitude, that natural aptitude or, natural skill set, tend to be the ones that are the easiest for people to master, and therefore become really competent in, and therefore be, you know, in a place where they can do it without a sweat, without too much stress, and, you know, get rewarded for it. Again, could I have been an astronaut? Maybe. You know, it would have taken an enormous amount of work, and I probably would have been mediocre at best, but could I have done it? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe some of my physical limitations would have prevented me from doing it ever at all. But, you know, I'm not saying you have to have like this natural born, you know, Mozart talent to do it, because the work and the effort to get better at something is absolutely half of the battle. So if you're willing to put in the work, there's no saying you can't do something. But what I've seen people be the happiest with in terms of like low stress, high success has been things that they're naturally very talented at.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful. So next one was just, you know, with resumes or companies or industries that ask for kind of a lengthier resume or lengthier, I guess, employment papers. Are you able to touch on this at all in terms of, you know, what you should prioritize going in the front? You know, some companies will say, oh, I'm only looking at the first 5 pages and things of that nature. Have you had experience with that?
I haven't seen a lot of limits on like the first 5 pages. Are you talking about like more of a CV or like an online application process?
Yeah, yeah. So CV, the comment here was more federal jobs as well. Seem to want a little bit more detail in that capacity.
Right. Okay. Federal job applications are a whole different animal.
Yeah.
They're a very specific structure of job application for the federal jobs, you know, for Fed jobs. I'm not an expert in that. I'm sure there probably are some career coaches out there who are, or bloggers or whatever. But, you know, from what little I've seen, there are specific things that they are looking for. Go back to the job description, go back to the agency's missions, look for those keywords. Some of them are going to be filtered by keywords. You got to get those keywords in there, especially when they are going to be, you know, something that's going to be filtered by a tool, not a human, but a tool. You just got to get those keywords in there, because you will never get in front of a human if the filters take you out. Okay. So again, that goes back to read the job description really, really closely.
Great. That actually does answer the next question was, you know, how do you kind of get past that AI that's kind of sorting through resumes? And to your point, it's touching on those keywords and really making sure that job description matches, or your resume matches that job description. Another
thing about the AI of job banks, whether it's, you know, a big one like, you know, Monster or Indeed or whatever, or if it's like an individual one for the company. When you send a resume into those kinds of things, and you know it's going to go into a computer bank, which is almost everywhere these days, it is not a time to get creative with your resume. It is not a time to get creative with your resume. Make it extremely, not basic, and I don't mean that in a bad way, predictable. You know, the first line should be your name, not your name down the side. You know, don't use weird fonts. Don't use crazy fonts that a computer is stupid. Computers are stupid. They can only do what we tell them to do. Do not, you know, use a fancy font that they're going to mistake a G and a C in your email address, and therefore you'll never get the email. Make it extremely basic in terms of format, but get, you know, creative, if you will, in the content, but not the format. Okay, now the only time I'd say that's not true is if you're going into a creative environment, a creative role, like an art role or graphic design or advertising, you know, or something like that, where they're looking for real creativity, then yeah, maybe you're going to want to change that up a little bit. But again, still be aware that, you know, if your resume is going to be read and optically character scanned by a computer, you're not doing yourself a favor by being creative. You want to use a really basic font, a large enough font that the computer won't misread it, and have it be extremely predictable in terms of the order that you submit things.
That's really helpful. That's a really, really good point. I would never have thought about that.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see here. Let's see. So one of the questions was, should you highlight soft skills to a greater detail than, let's say, quantifiable skills? And my initial thought was, when you were going over the cover letter, is that might be a perfect time to kind of touch on that. What is your opinion on, working soft skills in?
My answer is, it depends on the job you're applying for, and the job description will tell you exactly what my priorities are as a recruiter. If my job that I'm searching for is a very soft skills type job, a very client facing job, retail or something like that, I really care about your communication style, how you interact with humans, what is your speaking style? Are you very assertive? Are you very, soft? What is, describe that to me. So really it depends on the job. And I'm going to say those things in the job description. I'm looking for someone who blah, 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 blah. I'm going to tell you what I'm looking for. And let me tell you why. And this is my HR wonk moment. I can't select you off of criteria that I don't advertise for. Let me say that one more time. I can't select you, make selections off of criteria that I don't advertise for, or at the minimum list in my interview process. And it's a fairness thing, but it's also a Department of Labor thing in terms of auditing. Companies get audited for their selection processes to ensure that we're not being biased. It's a good reason. It's an onerous reason for HR, but it's a very good reason. Because I have to show that I am selecting on objective criteria, or if they are subjective criteria, that I am evaluating all of the candidates on similar criteria. Okay.
Got it.
So
That's
be aware that some of the things that might feel really repetitive in the interview process are, again, for really strong regulatory reasons, and they're meant to protect you from bias.
No, that's a really good point. That's, even speaks more to the reason why you need to reread that job description over and over before you send them that resume.
There are whole departments in certain companies, depending on the size of the company, that do nothing but job descriptions, write them, read them, evaluate them, figuring out which ones qualify for level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, because that's tied to pay. And so you have to be able to go back and justify, why am I paying this person this, and I'm paying this person this? And I have to go back and be able to justify, because this person does this skill and this person does this skill. I mean, that's in the weeds from an HR perspective, but it affects you when you're applying for jobs.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Looks like we have somebody. Let's see. Would anyone like to unmute and ask their own question? Let's see what time it is. We got about 4 minutes left here. Anything that somebody really is dying to ask, because we got quite a few questions in here, and I'm happy to send this.
I see a hand raised, Logan, by Charlie Herbert.
All right.
Here's what I find.
Oops. Talk to my watch. Let's see. Charlie, where are you?
Charlie, can you unmute?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, I'll go ahead and ask my question now. First of all, thank you, Susan, for the presentation. It's very informative. I just was wondering if you could speak to, as far as some of the, attachments and, types of work that's been done in a previous job or experience as support for skills and such. So one question I have is, what would you suggest as far as the inclusion of, say, a long report that a candidate does writes up on behalf of a division or department, so there's no specific name or author listed? And also, if you could speak to, and it was talking about cover letter versus resume, and when to include different things as far as attachments. But I also figured that, could it be a question of using judgment on where to put those? For example, I might not want to use testimony in a cover letter, because there might be certain ethical or confidentiality there. whereas summarizing it in a resume might be better. And then other things might need to be could be more fleshed out because they've been thoroughly declassified. So maybe you could speak to that.
I have worked in a classified environment. I was in the Army for 11 years in military intelligence. And then again, I worked for Lockheed Martin in human resources, where lots of things were confidential, but of course we do work on classified things as well. The first thing I would say is, as a recruiter, don't send me anything I haven't asked for. Do not fill up my inbox or the envelope or whatever it is you're sending me. Do not send me stuff I'm not asking for. And it is extremely rare. Well, I won't say it's extremely rare. It's dependent upon the job, whether or not I ask you for anything at this early of a stage. At the point at which I ask you for it, of course, send it to me, send whatever it is to me, but don't send it to me at the stage at which you're sending me a cover letter and a resume and I don't know who you are. You're clogging up my inbox. I'm not going to read it. It's going to end up in the circular file. You wasted your time, my time, postage, paper, all that good stuff. Okay. One thing I have sometimes seen in job descriptions, like initial job postings, are writing samples, particularly if it's going to be for a marketing company or a marketing, thing, or they want screenshots of your social media, posts or things like that. If they ask for something, yes, include it. Because if you fail to include it, I'm not going to consider you because you obviously can't read my job description. I know that all of that sounds super harsh, but I've got to, cull the pack somehow. And again, I probably got 500 applications. You mentioned testimony and you mentioned like reports and things like that. I would be extremely cautious of that. From the corporate perspective, why would you send corporate work product to another corporation that you were applying for? Not even from an ethical perspective, but just from a legal perspective, I don't know that that's a good idea.
Oh, well, not so maybe I wasn't clear. So not necessarily attaching testimony documents, but referencing that you wrote testimony for X case, and some people have put external references and listings. The background is I work in utility regulation, and so literally it's part of our jobs to hold rate cases and things regarding these companies. So
okay, I understand what you mean right now. So if you have testified in a court of law regarding a case, then just simply say that. You don't have to give me any documentation on that. I will believe whatever you tell me, which is why I said do not fabricate, do not exaggerate, do not lie to me in a resume, because those things will come out. But just tell me I've acted as a expert witness in over 15 cases, blah blah blah. That's great. Just tell me that. You don't have to give me actual supporting documents unless I ask you for them later on. And again, it wouldn't be at the front end. It would be much later in the selection process. In terms of reports and things like that, again, I would never suggest that you send out work product from one company to another company that you're applying for as proof of your skills or something like that. Yeah, that would make me nervous. I would never suggest that.
Perfect.
Did that answer your question, Charlie?
Yeah, to an extent. Obviously, if it was a private company, but in the case of public sector, they make reports publicly dispensed. But yes, to an extent, yeah, I get the gist. Thank you.
You can't probably claim that entire report, as you said, is probably a team product. So if you can point to the sections that you are responsible for, because I'm not hiring your team, I'm hiring you. So you'd have to be extremely specific. But yes, if it's a publicly available document, yeah, that's okay. But again, I would want you to clarify specifically what you're responsible for.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. Can I jump in?
Please.
I'm Catherine, the next written comment. So it looks like Cynthia after me and I were both asking how you and most recruiters view functional resumes or chrono-functional. I've found that as a career changer, a chrono-functional seems to allow me to demonstrate both as someone who's been in the workforce for 15 years. But I've heard that recruiters can't stand anything that's not straight chronological. And my second question you ended up touching on, but what insights can you share if we're not having those typical problems for ATS? What else should we keep in mind besides have the keywords in and have everything formatted simply? Thanks.
Those are two great questions. I will tell you that my personal resume is a functional resume.
Okay.
But I will tell you that I think it is probably a true statement that most recruiters cannot stand functional resumes. For those of you who don't know exactly what we're talking about, a chronological resume is exactly that. It is time. So it is the most recent job, it's reverse chronology, most recent job, next recent job, last job, all the way back down. Usually at least the last 10 years for very experienced professionals, or more. Functional resumes are what it sounds like. They're sectioned off kind of like those 5 core competencies: my leadership experience, my teamwork, maybe not teamwork experience. Like for me, I have like my communications experience, my curriculum development experience, my educational presentation experience, my HR experience, et cetera. Yeah, I find that when you are industry changing or job changing, meaning your discipline is changing and you're applying for something outside of your past jobs or your past industry, functional resumes are really good for that, because it allows you to highlight those things that are probably most applicable to the job that you're applying for, right?
Okay.
Versus your chronological one, where your most applicable one may have been like 10 years ago, but in a functional one, you can make it the top line, okay? That's a little challenging when you are limited to a chronological resume, but that is really the one that most people are looking for. That, again, when I said earlier, don't be creative with your format, because again, that's what the computer is talking about. They're looking for chronological because that is 98% of what you're going to find out there. The more I find functional resumes are really only applicable to people who are more advanced, or more experienced, have more years under their belt, because they have enough material to make it a functional resume. Early in their career, meaning first 10 years out of college, it's almost always going to be a chronological resume. So I can't really give you an answer, Catherine, I'm sorry, but
no, but that was helpful.
I think they do both have their place, but I do agree that most people are looking for a chronological resume.
Okay, and on the ATS insights, any other thoughts?
On the other than what I've already said, anything specific about ATS?
Anything beyond like the keywords, any things that as a recruiter, on the back end that the average applicant just wouldn't be aware of as far as.
Okay, well, I've already talked about formatting, that optical character recognition systems are limited. You want a sans serif at minimum 10-point, maybe 12-point font, 1-inch margins, because if the paper gets slid in and it's like this, stuff is going to get cut off if your stuff goes all the way to the margins. Force yourself to edit just the important parts. Again, I believe a sans serif font, it gets less problems from a computer. Minimum 10-point, 12-point is better. Also, a lot of the people reading your resumes, and I have to remind my college students this, are slightly older, have reading glasses. If your font's like this because you're trying to cram everything in there, they can't read it. They're going to throw it to the side and go to the other 20 resumes that they can read. So again, you're not doing yourself any favors by like cramming the tiniest font you possibly can. Force yourself to edit. Force yourself to edit.
And would columns, where I can't even remember if it was a table that I based it on or not, but columns that I did for the functional part where I had, the section I was a teacher, so sections for each skill. Are any columns at all, even if they're expertly formatted, a terrible idea? Yeah,
they kind of are, because computers are trained to read left to right, the full width. So if you're setting stuff up in columns, a human can pivot and do that. A computer will spit it out and make an operator look at it, which, if you don't care about that, that's fine, but it's going to delay getting your stuff into the system. And for those of you on the call, ATS is applicant tracking system. It's just the generic term for the computer databases where all your resumes end up.
Thank you so much for your answers and your presentation. It's been really helpful.
You're welcome. I'm very happy to help.
Now thank you very much for all these questions and answers. But we are over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, write down some of these additional questions that you guys had in this group message here, and we'll see if Susan has some time to respond in over the next bit of time, and maybe we'll send them over to you guys.
Sure.
Other than that, Susan, did you have any other things you wanted to say before we wrap up here?
No, like I said, I will share my slide deck with you, and I will also share, it's embedded in the slide deck. I kind of skipped through it, but there's a 10-minute video of how to look good on Zoom. And it's really just a good video. I know it was made during earlier in the pandemic, but Zoom is not going away. Especially at the early stages, people do Zoom. Companies love it because it's fast. Nobody has to come in. Nobody, you can have team members from like 5 different sites Zoom interview the same candidate in the same 30-minute window, and we can all meet you at the same time. So it's very efficient from a employer perspective. So it's not going away, but you have to present yourself well on Zoom. So I will include a link on what is, in my opinion, one of the better. She's a professional photographer, and she gives a really good explanation as to why certain things work in Zoom and why things don't. So I'll include that as well.
Very, very helpful. This whole presentation was so chock full of stuff that, I didn't know. And so I'm definitely going to take a lot of these nuggets and apply them.
You probably knew it. It was probably
just,
you've forgotten it.
Exactly. Some of that, but that chart that you had was so, just to like get the juices flowing in terms of, where my stories are going to come from during that interview. That has always been something that I struggle with. So that was very awesome.
Oh, can I give a quick plug to that little chart, the 5 big examples chart?
Absolutely.
My husband retired from the Army after 28 years of service. Awesome, right? Well, he had never written a resume in his life. He enlisted at 17 and then retired after 28 years. He had never written a resume, had never had a job interview in his life. Just because of the nature of the Army, he never had to. So his first interviews after he retired from the Army, he was terrified. I took him through my entire class, a little bit more in depth than what I've given to you tonight, but basically my class. And then we spent a full week doing just his 5 big examples, writing everything out. And then I actually videotaped him with my phone, simple, videotaped him answering questions. And he was like, oh, I can do that, no problem. Okay, let's do it. He was so nervous, he stumbled, he couldn't remember stuff. We did it again and again and again. It's not rocket science, okay? This whole thing is not rocket science. I worked for Lockheed Martin. We did rocket science. This is not it. It is really all about homework and preparation and practice. That's all it is. It's becoming familiar with stuff. It's about doing your research. It's about getting stuff ready and then practicing it so that when the time comes for your interview, you're confident and calm, and you perform well, at that moment where it matters. And the plug I'll give you is that the first job that he really, really wanted, that he applied for, he actually got it. So he is my proof that the process actually works.
That is awesome. That's a really good story. I know that's exactly what it is. It's just practice. So
it really
is. Thank you
is.
so much, Susan. That's awesome.
And I'm so glad to share it with you guys. And my email address will be on the slide decks, and I'm happy to field questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much again, Susan. Thank you everyone for joining us. Like I said, if you have any questions, I'll feel free to drop them in this chat. Feel free to send them to me or Susan or whoever, and we'll get that taken care of. Thank you all again, and hope you guys have a good rest of your night.
Thanks very much. Take care. Bye. Go Terps.
Go Terps.
Thank you.